In this video we're making 4 simple wire wrapped loops for bracelets or necklaces. They're perfect for making links in a chain, and I'm also going to show you how to connect them all together. This first one here is just a basic link with a bead in the centre and a loop on each side. The second one is another really simple link with what looks like a bead in the centre made out of wire, and then the loop on each side. The third one here is a design with the bead and the wire wrapped around in a spiral. And our fourth one is a simple design with the wire coming around each side in a twist. Then I'll show you how I connect my links together. All our designs are made with 20 gauge wire and the beads are 8mm. First up, we're starting with our basic link with the bead in the centre and a loop on each side. For this design we need 3 inches of 20 gauge dead soft silver wire. We start by measuring in about 1 inch from the right hand side. Just grabbing it with my pliers there on the 1 inch mark. Then I push the wire back to make a 45-degree bend. And grab it with my round nose pliers just above the bend. It helps if you can make a little mark on your round nose pliers, especially if you're making a chain with a heap of loops. You want all your loops to be about the same size, so I'll just put a little mark about halfway along my round nose pliers. So holding the wire onto that mark on your pliers and holding it just above the bend, then we can bring this tail around our round nose pliers and across on top of the other wire. Then I rotate the loop just a little bit towards me so that it sits directly over the top of that longer wire. Then I just hold the end of our loop there with the pliers so that we can wrap this little tail around that wire and hold it all secure. Gently bring this little tail around a couple of times, nice and tight and tidy, so you've got a secure connection there. I normally bring it around 2 times, and then you can cut that little tail off nice and short and crimp it in tight so there's no sharp edges. Now you can check your little loop, make sure it's nice and round and sitting straight in how you want it. Once you're happy with that side of your link, then you can go ahead and pop your bead on. And we're going to repeat the process on the other end to make our other half of our link. Now, making sure the bead is on as far as it can go, then I like to hold this loop on the left hand side straight up and down. Then with my tiny little pliers on the right hand side, I'm going to grab it as close as I can to the bead and then push the wire backwards to form that 45-degree bend. Now coming back in with our round nose pliers, we can hold that wire against the mark we made on our pliers and then bring this tail around our round nose pliers and across the other wire, rotating that loop slightly towards me so that it sits directly above, and then we can wrap this little tail around a couple of times so that our loops match up with the other side of the bead. So once you've brought it around a couple of times, then you can cut that tail off nice and short and crimp it in tight, and you should have 2 matching sides for a nice even link. Now it's on to our wire only link. So this one has the wire wrapped around a bunch of times to look like a bead in the centre with a loop on each side. For this design we need 10 inches of 20 gauge dead soft silver wire. We start by measuring 1 inch in from the right hand side. Then holding with our pliers on that 1 inch mark, we can push that end back and make a 45-degree bend. Then it's back with our round nose pliers, holding it just above the bend and on that little mark we made on our pliers. Then we bring this tail right around our pliers and over the other wire, gently rotating that loop towards us, and then holding our loop secure on the end with some pliers, we can bring this little tail around the other wire to secure it in place. Couple of loops around, and then you can cut that tail off nice and short and crimp it in tight so that it's nice and tidy and going to sit under the wire wrap. So normally we would pop a bead on and then wrap a loop on the other side, but this one is just going to have the wire wrapped around in the middle, so we just need to measure out a space for the wire and then pop the other loop on. So I'm just measuring 1/2 centimeter across from the other side, and then holding this loop straight up and down on the left, then grabbing it with our pliers, we can push that wire back and make our 45-degree bend. Grabbing that wire just above the bend with our round nose pliers and holding it on the mark we made, then we can bring this long tail around our round nose pliers and across the other wire, rotating that little loop if you need to so that it sits right in the center. Then we can start gently wrapping this long wire nice and tight around the wire in the middle in between the two loops here. So I find holding it with my pliers here, I can get some really nice tight loops around for a first layer. Then I can just work the wire around until I've got a nice even looking bead. So I just keep wrapping it until I'm happy with it, doing a couple of layers and building it up in the center. Once it's nice and even looking, then you can bring your wire towards one of the ends and just bring it in really nice and close to one of the loops so that you can hook it around the base, crimping it in nice and tight so there's no sharp edges. You can check everything over, make sure it's all sitting nice and straight and tight. Now it's on to our third design, the spiral on top of the bead. For this one here, we need about 6 inches of 20 gauge dead soft silver wire. And again, starting by measuring in about 1 inch from the right hand side, holding it with our pliers here on that 1 inch mark and pushing it backwards for a 45-degree bend. Then grabbing it with our round nose pliers just above the bend and holding it on our little mark on our pliers, we can bring this tail right around our round nose pliers and across the other wire, rotating that loop towards us so that it sits over the center, and then holding onto this loop nice and securely while we bring this tail around the other wire and secure it in place. Bringing it around about 2 times, and then we can cut that tail off nice and short and crimp it in tight so there's no sharp edges. Now you can check your loop, make sure you're happy with it and it's nice and round and sitting straight. Then we can pop our bead on, sliding it down as far as it will go, and then holding this loop on the left hand side straight up and down so that we can grab it on the right hand side as close as we can to the bead and push that wire backwards to make our 45-degree bend. Now grabbing it just above the bend and holding it on that mark we made on our pliers for sizing, then we can bring this tail right around the round nose pliers and across over the other wire. Then holding our loop secure, we can bring this tail of wire around the other wire to secure our loop in place. I like to bring it around again as well, just so it's got a nice secure base on this end. So just holding it with my pliers. Once it's nice and secure, we're going to start to bring our wire over towards the left hand side so that we can form our spiral. So I'm just gently working this wire, not pulling on it too hard. I'm more just folding it around the bead and just following that shape of the bead. So you'll have a ring that's sort of smaller and then a bigger ring around the center and then another ring that's smaller on the other end as we bring it over towards this left hand side of our link. And as we're working this wire down smaller, we want to have it come down and meet up with the bottom of the loop on the other side so that we can gently bring it around the base of that loop a couple of times just to secure that in place. Once it's nice and even on both sides, then you can cut your little tail off nice and short and crimp it in tight so there's no sharp edges. Now you can take some time with your pliers and make sure your wire on your spiral is sitting nice and evenly. Now it's on to our fourth design, which I call the twist. The wire wraps around the bead on each side, so whichever way the bead is sitting you can see one of the wires wrapping around it. For this twist design we need about 6 inches of 20 gauge dead soft silver wire. For this design we want to place our 45-degree bend just off the middle. So 3 inches would be in the center. And so I want it just less than that, so about 2.5 inches on the right. So I just grab it with my pliers on that 2.5 inch mark and push the wire back so that we've got our 45-degree bend there. Then we can make our first loop, so grabbing it just above the bend there with our round nose pliers, holding that wire on our mark. Then we can bring this tail around our round nose pliers and over the other wire, rotating our loop slightly towards us, and then we can bring this tail right around the other wire so that it finishes pointing upwards. Now we can place our bead onto this longer original piece of wire, down as far as it will go, holding that loop on the left straight up and down, and then grabbing it with our small pliers as close as we can to the bead and pushing that wire back for our 45-degree bend. Grabbing just above the bend with our round nose pliers, holding the wire on our mark, and we can bring it right around our pliers and across the other wire, rotating that loop towards us. Then we can bring this wire right around the other wire. We want to end up with one wire pointing up and one wire pointing down. So I'll just bring this right hand side one down, then making sure our loops are nice and straight on each side. Then we can bring each tail end around the bead to the opposite side, bringing each tail around so it meets up with the loop on the other side, and you can wrap it around the base there. Wrapping it around a couple of times until it's nice and secure and you're happy with the look of it. You want nice tight tidy loops on each side. Once you're happy with them you can cut that tail off nice and short and crimp it in tight so there's no sharp edges. You should have a nice even link there with that wire wrapped around on both sides and a loop on the ends. Now I'll quickly show you how to attach the links together. So you just make whichever link you're making. I'll just make a simple link here, which is the one with 3 inches of wire. So you start the link out the same. So measuring my 1 inch along, making my 45-degree bend, wrapping it around my round nose pliers. But now, before you wrap that wire around the other wire, you're going to add your previous link on. Pushing it up into that little loop on the end, and then you can wrap your little tail of wire around that original wire. So this is how you make longer lengths of links together like a chain. You just attach the previous link on and then go ahead making your next link. The links are made exactly the same, you just have to make sure you've added that previous link on into your little loop before you do up the wire. Once you've done a few, it ends up quite a long chain that you're attaching onto your next link. Once the bead's on, you just make the other end of your link exactly the same, making your loop and securing it by wrapping that wire around. The only thing you need to remember is on the first side of your link, you pop the next link onto that loop before you wrap your wire around to secure it in place. So it's really simple to connect your links together and continue making a nice long chain. So there's our 4 simple wire wrapped loops or chain links.